In this video, we'll be focusing on going from an equation to a table. We know we have different ways of representing a linear pattern. We have the equation form, the table form, the graph form, and the context form. But in this video, we're going to focus on going from the equation to the table. We know that the linear equation is going to look like y equals mx plus b. And by replacing the x value and solving for y, we'll be able to fill out our table. So let's take a look at the first example problem. We have the equation y equals 3x plus 5. And by replacing these x values, we're able to figure out where our table is going to be. So, taking a look at my table, the first value I want to replace is x equals 0. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this x, and I'm going to replace that with a 0. Now I'm going to solve for y. 3 times 0, or anything times 0, is just going to be 0 plus 5, and 0 plus 5 is going to equal to 5. So I know that when x equals 0, my y value is going to be equal to 5. Now let's figure out our next point. So instead of replacing x with 0, I'm going to replace x with 1. So I have x equals 1. And now I want to solve for y. 3 times 1 is just going to be 3 plus 5, and that's going to equal to 8. So when x equals 1, y is going to be equal to 8. Now solve for our next point. Instead of replacing x with 1, now we're going to replace x with 2. So I have x equals 2. So I'm going to replace this x with the 2 and solve for y. 3 times 2 is going to be 6 plus 5, and 6 plus 5 is going to equal to 11. So I know when x equals 2, my y value is going to be equal to 11. And finally, for our last problem, I'm going to replace the 2 with a 3. So here I have x equals 3. So I'm going to replace x with a 3. And now I'm going to solve for y. 3 times 3 is going to be 9 plus 5. And 9 plus 5 is going to equal to 14. So when x equals 3, my y value is going to be 14. Let's take a look at our second example problem. Here I have the equation y equals, I have 4/3 x minus 2. And I'm going to replace x with these following values. First, I'm going to replace x with 0. So I'm going to take this x value and replace that with a 0, and then solve for y. So 4/3 times 0, or anything times 0, is just going to be 0 minus 2, and 0 minus 2 is going to equal a negative 2. So when x equals 0, my y value is going to be equal to negative 2. Now let's solve for our next x value. Instead of replacing x with 0, we're going to replace x with 3. So replacing x with 3, 4/3 times 3. Notice how I have a dividing by 3 down here and a times by 3 on top. So when I have a fraction, that's the same thing as doing division. And when I have division and multiplication, those are opposite operations. So divide by 3 and times by 3, these 3's are going to cancel out, leaving me with just the 4 minus 2. So now 4 minus 2, that's going to equal 2. So that when x equals 3, my y value is going to be equal to 2. All right, let's plug in our next value. So this time, instead of replacing x with 3, we're going to replace x with 6. So instead of x, I'm going to write in 6. And now I'm going to solve for y. So 4/3 times 6. Since I'm dividing by 3, 6 divided by 3 is going to equal to 2. And then 4 times 2 is going to equal to 8. So 8 minus 2, that's going to be equal to 6. So I know when x equals 6, my y value is also going to be equal to 6. And now let's figure out our last table. Instead of replacing x with 6, I'm going to replace x with 9 this time. So instead of x, I'm going to write 9. Now 4/3 times 9. since I have this fraction, I'm dividing by 3. So 9 divided by 3, that's going to be 3. 4 times 3 is going to be 12 minus 2. And 12 minus 2 is going to equal to 10. So when I have x equals 9, my y value is going to be equal to 10. Let's take a look at our last table. Here we have the equation y equals 3 over 2 x plus 6. And we're going to place the x value with these following numbers. So the first x value, I'm going to replace x with 0. So I'm going to take this x value, and I'm going to replace it with 0. Now I'm going to solve for y. So 3 over 2 times 0, or anything times 0, is just going to be 0, plus 6. And 0 plus 6 is going to equal to 6. So when x equals 0, my y value is going to be equal to 6. Now let's plug in our next number. Instead of replacing x with 0, now we're going to replace x with 5. So 3 over 2 times 5. Since 2 and 5 don't really cancel out, I'm just going to multiply the top numbers first. So 3 times 5, that's going to be 15 over 2 plus 6. 15 divided by 2 is going to be, half of 15 is going to be 7.5 plus 6. And 7.5 plus 6 is going to equal to 13.5. So I have, when x equals 5, my y value is going to be 13.5. So now let's replace our x value. Instead of plugging in x equals 5, we're going to replace that with x equals 10. So instead of 5, I'm going to replace that with a 10 and solve for y. So 3 over 2 times 10. So I know that 2 and 10 do cancel out. So I can divide 10 by 2. 10 divided by 2 is 5. 3 times 5 is going to be equal to 15 plus 6. And 15 plus 6 is going to equal to 21. So when x equals 10, my y value is going to be equal to 21. And for our last point, I'm going to replace the x value with a 15. So I'm going to replace x with a 15. And I'm going to solve for y. So since 2 and 15 don't really cancel out, I'm just going to multiply the top numbers first. So 3 times 15 is going to equal to 45 divided by 2. And I still have the plus 6. 45 divided by 2 is going to be 40 divided by 2 is going to be 20. 5 divided by 2 is going to be 2.5. So 22.5 plus 6. And 22.5 plus 6 is going to be 28.5. So when x equals 15, my y value is going to be 28.5. So just remember, when we're going from the equation to the table, we're just going to be replacing our x values into our equation and then solving for y. And that's going to help us fill out the table.